What's happening, fam? L.A.R movement still moving. Excuse me. The book is entitled Lessons from a Non-Custodial Father at Amazon, Kindle, and Create Space. A link will be in the description box below, as usual. This video is entitled 80s Baby Point of View of Adolescence. You know, because in the 90s I became a teenager, right? And it got real interesting because everything came to a head in the 90s. Like when people go, what about Chicago? What about Chicago? I was in high school in the 90s in Chicago. And I can guarantee you, it was going down way worse than it is now. And I remember people from back then would say back in the day it was like this. But here's the thing. With the 90s, my adolescence as an 80s baby, it was the childhood, right and wrong, and manners, and that upbringing versus an evolving society that became more dysfunctional and degenerate. So for me, I had the lessons of my grandparents. My parents were teenage parents, so really my grandparents took over. So them understanding their quote-unquote mistakes, because I'm here because, young hot asses was fucking when they wasn't supposed to be fucking. But also seeing how the whole world was evolving. Like, I remember when Hillary Clinton was talking about super predators, I was a kid. Like, I remember the change when people would look at me. You would see people of other ethnicities. They'd take you as a kid, but as you got bigger and bigger, you started seeing that. And they started treating you different. And, when you got like close to adolescence, like preteen, my grandparents would send me out to the store to get food. Like everybody used to do that. Well, go to the store and get this, and I'm going to give you this amount of money. You better bring me my change back, right? But we used to see how those store owners used to be real rude to us as kids. Now, if they see us with our parents or grandparents, then they act brand new. We'd be like, "The hell going on? You was a jerk to me. Yes, like following me around and cussing me out and acting like I'm stealing. And you see me every fucking day, but now you see me with my family. Now you friends, like whatever." And people act like that didn't happen, and then because we were allowed to go outside and play, and people weren't necessarily concerned about the violence, even when I was in rough neighborhoods, because there was a code of conduct that people seem to forget. That, the kids would be in the house by the time the street lights came on, but at nighttime, that was street time. That was street time. Whatever adult stuff or criminal stuff that happened when the street lights came on. Before that, people was keeping it cool. And so you started because you stayed up later, you was able to see the things that were going on. And I remember you made choices. That was the difference between certain family members. I remember the TV shows pointed this out, like 80s, 90s, from the 80s to 90s, the Cosby Show came out. And people was complaining in the 80s about the Cosby Show not being real. Then you have like Family Matters and The Fresh Prince and Parenthood and was it All in the House, something like that. The one with LL Cool J. And I'm missing Moesha and God dog it. There was a few other ones actually. Well, people didn't realize it was depicting the black family in a certain way because they still had men in the family, and those men were still taking on single mother households children to help out because it was still a family situation. People forgot about stuff like that. Where that's how we came up in the 90s watching TV. You know, at the end of it, Bill Cosby took in Max, you know, from Family, and they took in Olivia, you know. So it was different. Like Moesha had Hakeem, you know, Steve Harvey show. They was always looking after Romeo and Bullethead, right? The one with Curry. Y'all know who I'm talking about if y'all remember that back in the day. Mark Curry. LL Cool J character was an ex-football player written out of the house, but he was quote-unquote a nanny looking after a single mother's kids, right? Same thing with Family Matters with Steve Urkel. Like, the way they wrote the character, even though he, you know, I don't think his mother was married. I think Steve was learning that as we go. Same thing with Fresh Prince. You know, he got sent to be with the other family. And that was a dynamic where, you know, as adolescents, we got to see how other people were living. We can then dissect the directions we want to go because we had different families and different friends and different people who took people in. And the bond was still strong. You had cousins that you couldn't wait to see. And, you know, you had get-togethers where everything wasn't about money. You know, that's where we got the spades games and the dominoes, and you couldn't wait to get old enough. Like for me, I couldn't wait to get old enough to play chess. And then I got smart as a young kid so fast that I was beating older people at chess. And then, you know, some of y'all don't realize is some of your family members let you get smarter. And then I got past the phase where, oh, you did good. Now I'm about to put it on your ass for real. So I had to really start thinking. So that type of stuff. We got a chance to, in the adolescent times, that's where the masculinity part came. I remember from being an 80s baby. In the 90s, we were still able to fight with our friends. We were still, so, you know, we came from a generation, that's when like Mike Tyson in the 80s is the baddest man on the planet, like from the 80s and the 90s, right? And people forget Cus D'Amato. And there was a part about Cus D'Amato that used to say he didn't want Mike to be look at white guys and be timid and afraid and hold back, because in previous generations, because of Jim Crow and the civil rights movements, a lot of black men were stifled in a lot of different ways because they couldn't fully be masculine, because that was part of the lynching and killing and all that other stuff, because basically white men couldn't handle our masculinity. But by the 80s and the 90s, with all of the quote-unquote hip-hop and the crack era, and they're looking at these things as vehicles that will help destroy the black community, it kind of gave us that freedom also to just be extra manly and boyish. Not like as far as aggressiveness. We had the intellectuals and the guys who were aggressive, and who were the men, but not like it was in the 80s and 90s, because prior to that, we used to look at them old album covers, the guys be laying in leather pants, like girls and stuff like that, you know, the androgynous stuff in the 80s too. So we got to do that because Mike Tyson kind of was the symbol of that, like, man, I'm going to kick your ass. And then you would see it in all the athletes, and they start kicking it, and then you see the actors become action heroes and kicking ass. And I mean, racially, we remember being kids and younger, and other people of other groups, grown men, kind of having this animosity. And as we got older and got big enough, we weren't big enough, strong enough to take it to our dads and our uncles and our older cousins. We kept trying them, but we had to become men for that. But guys of other races, we'd be like, oh yeah, I could take them. And that started, you know, that thing. Because we would hear all the stories of the stuff that we did, that black men did to other people. You know, I remember in Chicago, basketball game, so there was a guy got done so bad they put him in a mental ward. You know, and we remember having to be excellent in everything. Like I remember, you had to be good all around the board, but at the same time, because of the crack era, people were letting talent supersede manners and right and wrong sometimes. And it was interesting because you didn't necessarily have to have the best morals. And that was different. That was an adjustment. Because if you didn't know how to, previously, if you didn't know how to carry yourself properly, you wasn't getting a shot if you was acting ignorant. There wasn't, excuse me, there wasn't that era where you could just be a knucklehead and everybody chase you. Like, people forget how bad they did Sonny Liston. You get what I'm saying? People forget that. And the irony of that was they did, in some ways they did Muhammad Ali absolutely worse, but in some ways they did Joe Louis worse than Sonny Liston. You know? So you had that. And I remember those things. I remember, you know, the rise of hip hop and people, and it was, I listen to the music now, I still jam it because in the 80s and the 90s, as far as hip hop is concerned, people forget that 80s hip hop had to compete with 80s music who was on the back end of like the Motown era, and you really had to bring it after that. So to be an 80s and early 90s rapper, your ass really had to be good. And everybody had to have their own separate niche. You know, that's why at the end of the day, there was no being the same as somebody. If somebody came out like one way and had one style, it was it. Your ass couldn't come out with it. You came out with it, your ass would never exist. You know, everybody had to be special and unique. And, you know, I remember you had to figure out how to be you. And I remember it being more genuine. I remember in the 90s listening to a lot of love music. I remember that. I remember, you know, Tony Braxton in the 90s. I remember still listening to Anita Baker records. I remember Barry White. Oh, you just keep telling me that. You know, people forget R. Kelly and Aaliyah, and they look at R. Kelly so bad, but they forgot that like Aaliyah's first song was "Age Ain't Nothing But a Number," and I don't know how the hell her parents had her sing that, but you know, I remember all those things back in the day because it was fun. It was fun because we got to see the change in where I remember my grandparents would be like, "Y'all acting a little too out of line. Y'all, we living in the last days," because we started acting so reckless, right? We was reckless in a completely different way. And it wasn't that we weren't doing anything that the generations previously before hadn't done. It was just, in the 90s, there was no shame. Like, shame started, you know, you gotta remember, 2 Live Crew was out at the same time as the Whispers was still out. You know, the Temptations was still out. People were still rocking that type of stuff. And you had, you could literally be 1 minute listening to Mississippi Mass Choir and walking to the car and listening to Too Short. It was just the cultures of manners and crass behavior were just smacking together. And which created a shitload of hypocrisy because that 80s androgynous Studio 54 era, we had parents like that. In the crack era, we had parents like that. And they were completely different from our grandparents. So because you had there was always consequences, but always love. And sometimes there was never a line in the sand. But there were certain things, it was complete lines in the sand with like certain things there was lines drawn in the sand, and then other things they were gray area, which created a generation, which created a lot of stuff that was wrong after that. You know, like I remember my grandparents, how they came up and wanted to grow up and have their children go to school and become something and not have to work as hard, which evolved into us. But we understood that work ethic and we did those things. Now it's gone so far in the other way that everybody wants their kids to not work that hard, but kids don't even work anymore. And adults don't even work anymore because people have a problem with being out in the elements or knowing the seasons or getting on the roof in the summertime or getting under a car or, you know what I'm saying, or cutting the grass in the summertime and you being a little skinny kid shaking and shit because you got to push that goddamn mower and you just, that motherfucker trying to kill me. You know what I'm saying? But I remember that in the 90s and that's how I'm drug dealing about my hustle. And there was other kids doing other shit, washing cars, cutting grass in the country with croaker sacks, picking oranges and fruits and stuff like that. And, we had a city and a country kind of living and cooking, and we had the best candy. I ain't gonna front, we had the best candy. And especially in the 90s when them Sour Patch Kids, everything y'all popping now, we was getting that as penny candy back in the day. And that's when, 80s and the 90s, you had them Kool-Aid cups. Anyway, I'm gonna get to the next video so I can talk about adulthood. You know what I'm saying? 80s baby POV of adolescence. Actually, I probably need to do a part 2 on adolescence.